Welcome to the HSSA podcast.
I'm your co-host, Ashley.
And I'm your co-host, Kaya.
Welcome back to our second Apple Podcast episode. I hope everyone's had an amazing holiday break and a great start to the new year. I'm so excited that you're here with us again.
Today we're diving into a niche topic that we're personally very interested in, the intersection of healthcare and business. We're going to talk about how health science students can get involved in business, the career options connecting the two fields, the challenges that come with it, and so much more.
So to help us understand what this actually looks like in real life, we're joined by someone who's doing exactly that.
We're so excited to welcome Sarah Chan. She's currently in her HBA 2 years studying health science and business. She's our beloved HSSA president, former president of one of the top 3 general business clubs at Western, with experience in pro bono consulting, product management, and overall thoughtful leadership. We're incredibly grateful to have you here to talk about your extensive background, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today and happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for inviting me and for all of your hard work and effort on the podcast too.
We're so lucky to have you here today. To start off, would you be able to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you're studying and maybe some of the decisions that led up to that?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Sarah and I'm currently in my 4th year doing a dual degree between the Ivy Business program here at Western and Health Sciences. Yeah, in terms of kind of what led me here and to this point, I think that that's like a bit of a windy sort of path to go down, and I'd love to like dive a little deeper into that. But I think overall, I've always been really passionate about the systems thinking component within health sciences. I think we get to learn a lot about the social determinants of health. We get to really understand health as not only simply an outcome, but really just like a symptom or like a small signal of a much deeper set of problems that shape that and what gets to that point. And so I think that for me, when thinking about that framework of thinking that I've learned from health sciences, it's not just learning about the biological or clinical studies, but it's really about how can we solve problems and really wicked problems that are driven by so many different factors and have many different sort of root causes across not only medicine but like thinking of the system as a whole. I'm thinking about like the incentive structures within healthcare, so how a lot of it is privatized, what drives R&D, and then thinking about sort of the business side of things, and how we're able to think of like the healthcare system as, you know, a business at the end of the day. And I think all of those different sort of factors is really what drives the patient experience, that when you go to like a clinic, why do you have to wait a certain amount of time, or like what is explaining the queuing system and things like that. And so I think answering some of those bigger questions was something that is a journey that I'm currently on that I would love to be able to continue to explore throughout my career. And so that's kind of how I tied in the health sciences component with the business side of things, because I think there's a lot of storytelling and alignment between different professionals, between people that have various backgrounds that's really required right now within healthcare particularly. And so we're still figuring that all out, but I think that's kind of why I'm interested in that intersection between business and health as a whole.
Wow, that's a really thoughtful and beautiful outlook, I feel like. And we would love to hear more about any like projects or clubs, internships, anything that really shaped that framework.
Yeah, for sure. I can kind of walk you through a bit of my background as a whole. So I think I've always been someone who just naturally like learns a lot by doing, and I think it's really helpful throughout your career to figure out how do you learn, even when you're in school. It's not just about sort of memorizing everything and then going and writing the test, but I think it's about figuring out with each class, like, how do I learn and what is the best way for me to approach this in the first place? And I think answering that question will be really helpful, because the knowledge that we're provided with is always going to be changing, but the way in which we can figure out how to sort of interface with that knowledge and approach it is really helpful. But anyways, that was a bit of a tangent. So yeah, I've always been someone who learns by doing. So I've been really interested in exploring like the startup scene, which is really where I started off back in high school in my free time. But I've always been into like science fair and research public health was my like part-time job back in high school, which I was really thankful for that opportunity. And I've also recently been involved on like the corporate side of things, ever going to Ivy. And I think just within clubs at Western as a whole, leadership and learning about what that means and what that can look like in different environments is something that I've really involved myself in, because I think all of like this exposure to different roles and different problem spaces as well as industries kind of allows me to think of how to understand problems from various different angles. And so over time, I think I've realized that the work that I'm really most drawn to sits at that intersection of like building through ambiguity and complexity and understanding systems and kind of putting people at the center. And so I think I started my career in startup research and very like venture capital environments. And I think in these environments, success really depends on getting to the objective truth very quickly. And I'm sure a lot of us in STEM can kind of resonate with that. It's not really based off of hierarchy or like process, because these teams in and of themselves were very small and very fast moving. And so my instinct kind of in this environment was to sort of make progress with whatever resources I had and kind of grow very comfortable navigating that complexity earlier on. And one of my first roles was actually as like a junior venture capital analyst. I don't think this is something that many people know about me, but there's actually a group of like angel investors in San Francisco that all work at Google, and they love to like come together and invest in like startups and innovation. And so just as a student, I like got in touch with them, and I expressed my interest to help out. And this was like one of the first internships I really had in my career. So as a student, I was trusted to kind of synthesize all of this like market research and look for signals to directly inform what they should invest in with my recommendations. And so being exposed to so many different business models within the field of like emerging technology and AI, where I could really compare and challenge different like startup founders' approaches to business development, really kind of shaped, I think, a lot of my like more strategic and analytical like way of thinking when looking and analyzing problems, and kind of taught me to back, I think, a lot of my assumptions with like evidence, to really operate with a lot of ownership over my opinions at a young age, because real decisions were being made based on my input to this group of like investors. I also spent, I think, my first few years within my career back in high school doing like independent scientific research. And I know this is something that a lot of people at health sciences are really passionate about as well. So I looked into microplastics and even the social behavioral responses to COVID-19. And so I think when I was presenting at science fairs and like kind of getting used to translating like scientific evidence to people, it was really a helpful way for me to learn how to translate more complex insights into like plain English and kind of learn how to question my own interpretations and reinforce the same habits there of like uncovering the objective truth through like data, through asking sharper questions and like validating ideas through that experimental process. And then I also kind of launched my own little small business. It was just like a plant delivery startup, but I would definitely some unsolicited advice, but I would definitely recommend anyone to just like work on that passion project or like build something from the ground up. Because I think in doing this, I was able to sort of like learn a lot about just like how to take an idea from like nothing into something. And even if it didn't work out at the end of the day, I was able to move into like teaching entrepreneurship and guiding teen founders at this startup called Prequel. And really like I learned how to like adjust, I think, programming based on these things called like NPS data, and kind of make very scrappy decisions based off of that. And so I think taking that like entrepreneurial background and like love for like programming and like teaching entrepreneurship to teens, I then went off to work in like this health tech startup. And that would like when you work in a startup, what's very interesting is you're able to, I think, wear various different hats because they're so strapped for like their resources and their time. And so when I worked at this health tech startup, I was able to honestly help automate like their customer service process just using basic AI like APIs like GPTs at the time. But really that helped their whole customer service team like serve patients really quicker. And so I think across all of these roles, I learned to cut through like ambiguity when there really is no solution in front of you, but it's like, what can you do to still drive forward what you hypothesize to be like the best way to proceed with things. And then I've learned from there, it's just important that even if you guessed incorrectly, you test that out as quickly as possible, you figure that out, and then you kind of validate and move quickly and make strategic trade-offs guided by your data, guided by the people you're working with. And that, I think, is like the core of who I am, is being very like user-centered and analytical and kind of unafraid to challenge assumptions and being able to sort of move ideas forward long before I had any formal authority, like starting off my career. But I think there was a bit of a transition once I got into university, which was more to like kind of systems thinking, I would say, where you're working on looking at ways that you can improve things of upstream importance. And so we learn about this in health side, where there's like downstream determinants and like upstream determinants. And I think if you can tackle those like bigger sort of like levers, I guess, you can have a lot more impact on everything that comes after. And so that was like what I learned through health science. As I moved through these like startup environments into public health, where I was able to work as like a peer leader and help a lot of like help promote health promotion campaigns to like teens. And then I worked in hospitals more recently. I'm doing research at like the London Health Sciences Centre, working on like a quality improvement project. And then also like government adjacent roles. So just think of like the LCBO, where I worked in strategy this summer, which is like super random. But I think my relationship with problem solving really changed. I guess I assumed that a good idea, once it's like I always assumed that once you have a good idea, as long as it's like validated by like people and like users when thinking of business, right? Like thinking of consumers, it should be enough. But I think working in these environments that are a lot more bureaucratic, really showed me that good ideas kind of fail if the systems themselves aren't aligned and if people, policy, and like incentives specifically don't move with them. And so I think the TLDR would be like, in public health, I saw a lot of campaigns fail, not because they sort of like lacked compassion, but because efforts were very limited when you think of things like funding and organizational constraints. I feel like I learned to translate between like the youth perspective we served and what the system could realistically support. And that was my first exposure to like systems thinking and how do those upstream forces we just talked about shape those downstream outcomes. And then more recently in my palliative care quality improvement work, where we're learning how to integrate like goal of care conversations for patients with dementia into the like hospital workflow, more so in the palliative care ward. So in that role, it's like I saw how patient care, I think, is governed by competing priorities. Like nurses are really busy, they're strapped for time. And so why would we care about something like patient dignity when there's so much resource scarcity and there's lack of physician time and like documentation burden? And I think that directly shaped patient outcomes even when everyone agreed on technically what should happen. And so I think getting one improvement to sort of land required aligning all of those different pieces, and it taught me the value of evidence-driven reasoning, and so sort of like showed me why translating between perspectives on the clinical, operational, and strategic side is critical. And then this summer at the LCBO, I helped define their like business-to-business strategy. So I know you guys can now buy alcohol for anyone who drinks at like Costco, or you can get it at like 7-Eleven. And so obviously this is new for LCBO and they didn't know what to do with regards to that. And so I really saw what it means to like innovate inside a very regulated like crown corporation, because LCBO is half government, half private. So every decision there had to respect legal structures and provincial policy and internal culture. And so really in that role, I feel like I learned how to align stakeholders, navigate constraints, and like have influence without authority as an intern, because any strategy that improvement that you suggest needs to first be sort of familiarized within the company, or else it won't really land. And so to do that, you have to build trust across departments long before presenting like a single idea. And I think that really showed me how fragile like strategy is when relationships themselves aren't necessarily tended to. And so that kind of second arc of my career has shown me the importance in continuing to prioritize learning about and understanding those upstream forces and really context in your career depending on my environment. And I've become more, I think, a little bit more like diplomatic and sort of attuned to how to like influence without authority and move the needle when risk, cost, culture, and capacity, like all of those things collide, while also maintaining that same sort of like bias towards action and experimentative sort of like approach that I developed earlier on. And I think more recently, the like final sort of loop that I've been focusing on as I kind of wrap up undergrad here is putting people at the center. And so I think parallel to like all of these experiences, I've always been someone who really cares about building something. And I think for me, that's like how I grow as a person, is not by like going to the gym or like working on myself in those typical ways, because I find I can't commit to those things. But I think if I'm instead contributing to building a community or something else, whether it's a product, like right now I'm a product manager at this like e-learning company called Vita, I feel like I've always been able to sort of learn the most alongside that, sort of in parallel. And so I think I've always been someone who wants to build like people-centered systems, teams, communities, cultures, and I'm thankful to have the privilege to be able to do that this year with HSSA. But I think like at my core, I really recognize the importance of like, I think showing up for people with intention and building relationships with tact. And I think that is something that like we should all be continuing to do throughout our lives. And it's something that I am working on. I make mistakes and I'm trying to continuously learn. But I think leadership, I was lucky in the sense that it really entered my life early. So last year, as you said, working on Western Founders Network, which is a really large like business, tech, and entrepreneurship club, where I was leading a team of over like 65 executives. And my whole goal here with Evyn, my co-founder, co-pres, was really to like revamp our entire vision and like mission on campus. And then recently being elected as president of HealthSci, the program here at Western, I have to manage my own council. And so I think as a leader, I really tried to be intentional about reading like more of the emotional undercurrents of the team and building what we learned about in Ivy called psychological safety, which is that feeling of like meaning and belonging that I think once people really feel a part of something, then they're at a position where they're able to like raise their hand, they're able to like speak up, and they're able to like take a chance on themselves and be in tune with what they care about and what they're curious about, etc. And so I really have a passion, I think, now for designing systems that people can envision themselves a part of. And I think teams as a whole really thrive when people feel understood and connected to the reason that they're there. And so I think that with all this said, I think these experiences have shaped my belief that like systems as a whole don't really change unless the people inside them can really like breathe and be themselves, collaborate, and like take ownership. So with all of that said, I think ultimately kind of that's brought me to this position where I'm like interested in like healthcare and business, right? But I think I'm really interested in that because the stakes are very human, and like many healthcare systems move quite slowly. And that means that like having the right products positioned the right way, can really have disproportionate impact. And I think that work within that intersection demands the combination of like skills that are very aligned with being like evidence informed, strategic in terms of your execution, and like having that systems thinking perspective as well as being people centered at the end of the day. And so I think that's kind of like what brings me to this point, but I'd be really happy to give more specific advice on like Western and what people can be doing to get involved.
That was so inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. I love your outlook on teamwork. And I'm also just really inspired by the initiative that it seems you've taken to gain your first internship and conduct scientific research in high school and start your own venture. And I'm sure that you have so much lived experience. And I think you'd be the best person to actually ask, what opportunity would you recommend that every student try?
It could look different from person to person, but I think that it's really important to do things that you're curious about. I know that sounds like such generic advice, but I think by genuinely like trying things that you're curious about, you're able to sort of like test things out as quickly as possible in terms of like what resonates with you, and then kind of have this natural filter in your life with like what doesn't align. I think if you're able to be someone that maybe reflects on how you're honestly feeling, which I think can be very vulnerable and challenging for us to do, you're then able to sort of be real with yourself in terms of like, does this align with me? I think it's important to treat everything that you're involved in, whether it's a club, whether it's an extracurricular or a job, as like you're given a set of tasks, but each task is really a way for you to drive home certain values in your life. And I think it's about being attuned to like, okay, what values here really resonate with me versus like what do I feel like I'm missing out on? And then you kind of iterate as you go, I think, throughout your undergrad and throughout your career. So I think just being really in touch with like with the things you naturally tend to gravitate towards, and also being really aware of like where do I tend to like hold myself back, be out of fear, out of like lack of environment or community to support that? And what are ways that I could like intentionally overcompensate and go out of my way to sort of do things that are more authentically aligned with like what I think I might care about. But yeah, that was like a very broad answer, but I think one thing I'd recommend for every student is starting something from the ground up, whether that's a club, right? Whether that's like, I think, for example, one thing I thought of recently was like, in being in like a president position in a club, I feel like it's really important for me to be able to talk to other student leaders. And like, I guess I would love to like work with other leaders about like, how can we do this better? Like, I think you get a lot of interpersonal situations where it's like, oh, I don't know what to do here. I wonder what other people's judgment would look like. And so I was thinking, oh, maybe I could create a club on campus that's like, all these like presidents can come together and just like chat in a circle like once a month or something. But that's an example. Is like, I think we as people like always experience little problems, even bigger problems on a day-to-day basis. And so it's like, what is one thing that you like, one unique pain point that you have? And I feel like if you really break it down to like a very specific struggle, then the odds are that's a very real experience that many others who are maybe like you experience as well. And so I would recommend that everyone create their own, like whether that be club or a startup or build their own product, whatever it is. I think it teaches you a lot about the fundamentals in terms of just like first principles problem solving. I think that's something that's really needed in this world is like we're given problems, but how, like, if we ask ourselves, why do these exist? And we keep asking ourselves why, and we get down to the root of like the drivers behind these problems. That's just a really helpful framework of thinking that's really valuable in today's day and age. And I think if you're building something from the ground up, everything that you create will only last if it solves problems. And so it's just a direct way to learn how to be a better problem solver and a better first principles thinker. But at the same time, you grow as a person by being able to learn how to rally a team, learn how to empathize with other people in terms of you're building something for others. So how do I put myself in their shoes? I think you learn a lot about public speaking and communication in terms of storytelling and learning how to sort of advocate for a cause that you care about. And I think what's super valuable is that like a lot of us just have this idea of like what we're working towards, but we've never really tested or tried out why that matters or if that really resonates with us until we get there. And by the time you get there, it'll be a little bit too late, I think. Well, actually, that sounds really negative. But sometimes by the time you get there, it's like, oh, maybe you could have come to the realization about what you care about a lot earlier on. And so I think in general, if we can learn to experiment more as a whole, treat our life as a series of mini experiments, I think you're able to really move forward in the right direction. And I think in this day and age, there's literally like the world is your oyster, and it's not even a lie. But I think it's like super helpful that to remember that it's like it's not necessarily about like securing the right internship or like getting into that like grad program right away, but it's more about like once you eventually get there, is that something that you genuinely care about and align with? And so I think in this day and age, like direction matters a lot more than speed. And I feel like it's going to be scary when AI like takes over the world and like when we're going to have all this free time and we're going to be like twiddling our thumbs and what are we going to do with ourselves? And I think it's so easy to just be distracted like on a day-to-day basis instead of like take that time to be in tune with yourself and realize like what is my North Star and like how can I move towards that while still having enough slack in your system to be able to figure out what that looks like as you go. So I'd recommend for anyone to just try and create something because I think it's a really good way to learn. Honestly, the biggest reason I think you should do that is because I think it just instills a lot of confidence. And I think that a lot of people are driven by desperation. And I think that's completely okay. And it's a privilege to be like, oh, that's like not ideal. But I think not a lot of people are driven by hope. And not a lot of people are doing things out of like being pushed towards having to do that. But not a lot of people are necessarily being driven towards things because it's like a pull, because it's like, I care about this, I'm excited about this. So whatever you can do, I think, in your own life to like shorten the feedback loop by doing small, like joining a club or like talking to this person or like doing those small steps, you'll get an immediate feedback loop and realize right away what your potential feels like. And I think you want to continue to explore that when you do that. So remember to like break down things that you think you care about into like smaller buckets and smaller tasks, and just get started so that you have momentum. And I think momentum is such an important thing. So yeah, also there's this club at Western called Momentum. I think it's like every Sunday for like 3 hours in the morning. You just go and work on anything but school and work.
Whoa.
And it's like, so you get to build things and you have a community and support network to do that. And I think for me, it's something I want to get more involved in, because it's like I don't make enough time to just do things that I care about. And so continue to like, yeah. So anyways, that's like a random plug. It's called Momentum, but
cool.
Yeah.
I will definitely be looking into that, because I feel like I never have enough time. So having an external club to provide that for you, I feel like is so helpful.
Yeah. And it's like I think it's so cool to be around people that are passionate about things, but they're just, it doesn't matter. Like I think we're so used to being bonded by us, like communities form around shared interest. But I think with Momentum, it's like there isn't necessarily like a shared interest per se. Everyone is super passionate though about their own thing. And so I think it's like a club that seems to really focus on process, and that's like a really cool way to like learn from like other people's perspectives, because it's like so different and diverse in the first place, but it's still helpful in the sense that like everyone wants to build something.
Yeah, no, I think that shared passion is really important, and also that sense of hope that you mentioned. Like I've always said that hope is one of the most important things a person can have, and I feel like with so much change in like healthcare and business and combining the two, it's hard to stay hopeful sometimes. But shifting gears to healthcare and business, can you kind of broadly describe what that landscape looks like, and what are some specific avenues that you can approach or people that might be interested could also take on?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think it's not something that I'm 100% like really well educated on yet. But in terms of some options you can explore, so we're looking first and foremost at like the private sector, right? I think right now there's a lot to think of in the private sector with regards to the intersection between technology, business, and entrepreneurship. So there's medtech. I think medtech is when you're thinking about like products, right? When you think about a hospital in general, like let's just maybe use that actually as our model to explore this question. When you think of like an operating room, there's a lot that goes into that. You can work on like the care side of things, or you can work on the actual like even the IVs and products that are being used. So that's like the first kind of like, the first like kind of career I think would maybe be medtech or industry, where it's like all of the different like research and development that's going into building these products in a way that's a little bit more like patient-centered, and innovative in terms of like the science and the development of these products in the first place. So I think that's a really cool emerging field. And within medtech, there's not a lot of medtech within Canada, to be quite honest. But there is a lot in the States, especially right now when you're thinking about San Francisco, for example. There's a lot going on in the startup space, and not just SF, but like around the world, because you have a lot of investors that are really recognizing the importance of like innovation in biotech and in these medical products, because healthcare as a whole is so constrained when it comes to like their capacity and resources. And so if we can use like medical products that are a little bit more efficient, and help us like optimize the products and all of our human efforts a little bit more, then that's like really helpful. And I think it's a really quick, easy way to like help solve some of our problems. So yeah, medtech is one kind of route. And I think within that, you don't need to be good at tech or research itself, but you could even be on the business side. You can be selling to hospitals. You can be kind of storytelling and communicating that value. And that's something that I'll be focusing on this summer as one of those tests I'm talking about to see if I align with it. I think also another field that doesn't necessarily get enough doesn't get talked about enough is healthcare consulting. And so what this really is like, do you guys know what consulting is?
It's hard to define. I feel like I've seen TikToks asking people what is consulting. They're like, PowerPoints. Like.
Yeah, no, like literally. So it actually is a lot of like PowerPoints and like relationship building, because those are tools to kind of just prove to people, like your clients, that like, hey, I care. But healthcare consulting, what it really is like, think of like a doctor, in the sense that like a doctor solves people's problems from a clinical perspective. Healthcare consulting is like a company or an organization, say like the Princess Margaret Hospital in Toronto is really struggling with like having enough like donors when it comes to blood, right? That's just like a random use case or random like case. but then they need help solving this problem. They don't have anyone specific on their team to solve that problem for them, and it'd be probably a shorter term engagement or a shorter term project to focus on. So healthcare consulting is they would kind of outsource someone to sort of solve that problem for them. In the same way that like a doctor helps with the clinical side of things, I feel like a consultant helps solve like more business and policy related problems. And what's interesting is different consulting firms, the reason why it's so much more efficient for a company or organization to outsource to a consulting firm is because these firms are like have insane networks, and so they have proprietary tools. They have access to like knowledge that not everyone in an organization or company would have access to in the first place. And so healthcare consulting is really cool. Another thing no one talks about is like sales within healthcare. For example, I know someone who was like a transfusionist at a hospital. It's a very clinical role. He focused on research his whole life, and he decided that he wanted to eventually transition into selling the actual transfusion machines because his hospital got a new one and he absolutely loved it. And now he has the clinical perspective because he is a clinician, but he sells to other clinicians, and so it doesn't really feel like that sort of like stereotypical like salesy sort of person we think about. But instead he gets to like push forward a product that he really believes in and kind of speak to clinicians that speak his language and that understand where he's coming from. So there's a lot within healthcare sales. On the business side of things, you can look into private equity. Every single company, whether they're public or private, is always investing so that in the long run they have like annuities to be able to like grow sort of that extra cash that they have just laying there. And so I think there's a lot within healthcare in terms of the investment side of things. One other thing I'll really point out that nobody really talks about as much is the startup scene. I think so many people are used to like applying for corporate intern roles and stuff like that, but really if you're interested in, especially in university, to get involved in startups, it's a different process where you just like cold email, you network, you pitch your value, the skills you have, but you really can bond with people about what they're passionate about in terms of like, why does this startup exist and what problem are they solving and how can I join the team in on that, because I also really, really care. And I think startups are super cool because you wear so many different hats. So earlier I was talking about all of these roles, but if you work in a startup, I think there's not necessarily a specific role. And so there's a lot of like healthcare startups happening right now, health tech startups. And I think it's a really cool way to like have a lot of ownership and work on like important projects at a young age. And you can use that, of course, to like pitch yourself and get other sort of skills or get other, positions moving forward. I think also there's like health policy. And so there's also public health. And so these are more kind of joining in on our current system. How can we improve it and make it better rather than starting from the ground up? And I think if you're interested in like aligning different perspectives, the wheels of change definitely move a lot slower in those organizations. But I think and there's a lot of like incentive structures from like the government or like, different stakeholders there. And it's very bureaucratic and hard to navigate. But I think if you are someone who is really good at like relationship building and like, slowly over time getting buy-in and like having subtle influence without authority, that I think these are public health and healthcare policy are really good roles like potentially for you, just from what I know from a bit of an external perspective. So these are everything that I think these are like some of the different options that exist when we're thinking of that intersection. And one more thing, one other like cool field within that intersection of like health and business is called quality improvement. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but it's like working in a hospital and then making things more efficient and optimized, like improving processes. So you could also like healthcare analytics. There's like all this data in hospitals. What are ways that we can like look at it and analyze it to realize what efforts we're doing have like the highest impact or results versus which efforts are maybe a bit redundant or like, and if that's the case, or like things are going to waste, then how can we like change those processes and make them more efficient? And so it's very similar. Quality improvement is very similar to like the scientific research method, but it's based more on micro experiments and really being boots on the ground and like understanding the people in the hospital and their efforts, like nurses, for example, and how can we really meet them where they're at and improve that. And the last career is also that I think of as like called product management. And so this is when you're thinking about owning like a product and think of a product as in like something you sell to consumers. But what are ways that we can like make the features better for these users in a way that solves more of their problems? Obviously, of course, you're going to drive forwards like revenue and profit as a result, but like that's not necessarily something that's a bad thing if you're solving people's problems where they matter. And so within healthcare, I know within femtech, for example, which is a field that I'm personally really interested in getting to know more about, there's a lot of product development right now in terms of like helping females have more understanding and insight into their hormones, because they tell a story, right? And so it's like, for so long, females have been under prioritized in like healthcare research. And as a result for that, a lot of our symptoms and how it presents itself is really misunderstood. And so I think that, you know, you could go through the research route and drive research in that area, which eventually leads into policies, which eventually will hopefully trickle down to implementation. Or you go the other route and just go build products, go join femtech startups and help consumers as a whole have more power in their hands. So there's two different routes.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all these opportunities and avenues that you could take with this intersection between healthcare and business. I actually found it really informative because I'm looking or hoping to get into a career that involves both of those sectors. But just in general, thank you for being such an amazing guest on this podcast. You have such a unique outlook, I find, and I'm definitely going to be taking some of your advice. So thank you so much for being here today and for showing up. I really appreciate that. I know you're busy.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you both having me and for being such like an open ear and for creating such a like safe space to share. So thank you so much. And honestly, like I'm still figuring everything out. Hopefully this like can provide something that people can work with and kind of like I'm sure incorporate their own perspectives and experiences and like build on in their own time. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys and your time today and for asking so many insightful questions. Thank you so much.